Let me ask you something before we even get started. Have you ever watched a scene, just one scene, and felt the air physically leave the room? Like the show reached through the screen, grabbed you by the collar, and said, "Pay attention. This is the moment everything changes." That's what the Pitt did at the end of Season 2. And if you're here, you already know what I'm talking about. That hallway, that confrontation, Robbie standing there with this barely contained fury in his eyes, and the words he delivers to Dr. Al-Hashimi that just hang in the air like smoke after a fire. Because what Robbie did wasn't just dramatic. It wasn't just good television. It was a detonation. A slow-burning fuse that the writers lit in the very first episode of this season, and we didn't even see it coming until the whole thing went up in flames right in front of us. So today, we're going to unpack all of it. Al-Hashimi's hidden condition, what it means for her character, Robbie's psychological state, and how far he's actually fallen, the ethics underneath all of it, because this show is smart enough to make you feel two completely opposite things at the same time. And then we're going to talk Season 3. The theories, the predictions, the questions this ending refuses to answer. Buckle up, because this one's going to go deep. Okay, so let's start with Dr. Hashimi, because I think she's genuinely one of the most underappreciated characters this show has built, and the finale just blew the roof off everything we thought we understood about her. From day one, Al-Hashimi presents herself as impenetrable, controlled. She's the kind of doctor who walks into a trauma bay and the entire energy in the room shifts. Not because she demands it, but because she commands it. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. She has this surgical precision, not just in medicine, but in the way she manages people, conversations, conflict. You never really see the seams. And that's intentional. The writers built her that way on purpose. Because when you construct a character who appears that airtight, every tiny crack becomes meaningful. Every hesitation, every moment where she just barely pauses a beat too long before answering question. And looking back at Season 2, those cracks were always there. We just didn't know what we were looking at. The tremor in her right hand during the Delgado case. Remember that? Most of us read it as stress, exhaustion, long hours, impossible cases, the weight of running a trauma floor. But it wasn't that. The show was planting something. The fatigue that seemed to accumulate faster than it should. The moment she deferred a procedure that, honestly, she'd have done in her sleep 2 years ago. A small hesitation here. A slight overcorrection there. She has early-stage Parkinson's, or at minimum, a progressive neurological condition that is beginning to affect her fine motor control. The show hasn't said it out loud yet. It's been all subtext and implication. But by the time the finale lands, it's not really a theory anymore. It's a conclusion. And here's what makes this so devastating from a character standpoint. Al-Hashimi has built her entire identity around competence. Not just professional pride. That's almost too simple a way to put it. For her, being a surgeon, being this kind of surgeon, isn't something she does. It's who she is. Her sense of self is completely fused with her ability to perform at that level. Which means that the moment her body starts betraying her, it isn't just a medical problem. It's an existential crisis. She isn't hiding her condition from the hospital out of selfishness or ego in the simple sense of those words. She's hiding it because to admit it, even to herself, would mean confronting the fact that the person she has always been might be disappearing. And there's nothing more terrifying to someone like her than that. This is why she hasn't told anyone. This is why she keeps showing up. This is why, even in the finale, when Robbie corners her and that conversation turns into something no one could have predicted, she doesn't break down. She goes cold, because cold is the only thing she has left when the armor is being threatened. Now let's talk about Robbie, because this is where it gets genuinely complicated, and the show deserves enormous credit for not making it simple. Robbie started this season already fractured. We knew that coming in. The events of Season 1, the losses, the systemic failures, the weight of being someone who cares so much in a system that often rewards caring so little. They left marks. Deep ones. He's been operating all season in this space between dedication and obsession, and the show has been very careful to show us both sides of that line. He's brilliant. He's empathetic in ways that are almost painful to watch. The scene with the teenage patient in Episode 4, where he just sits there and listens when every other doctor in that hallway is already thinking about the next case. That's real. That's who Robbie is at his best. But there's a darkness creeping in. Has been all season. And I don't mean darkness in a villain origin story kind of way. I mean the kind of darkness that comes from a genuinely good person slowly losing perspective because they're drowning and nobody's noticed or nobody's cared enough to say something. His fixation on Al-Hashimi built quietly. It started as professional concern. He genuinely noticed something was off. A doctor noticing another doctor struggling is not inherently sinister. But somewhere around the midpoint of the season, it crossed a line. From concern to surveillance. From observation to something that started to feel almost predatory in its attention. He's keeping mental notes. He's watching her in ways she doesn't know about. And he's telling himself it's because patients are at risk. Which, and this is the brutal part, might even be true. But it doesn't matter because by the time he confronts her in that hallway, his motivations are so tangled that even he probably couldn't honestly separate what's about patient safety and what's about power. What about the right thing, and what's about the fact that he feels invisible, overlooked, and like she has dismissed him one too many times? The threat he delivers is cold. Calculated. It doesn't sound like Robbie. And that's exactly the point. This is what the slow erosion of a person looks like. Not a dramatic fall. Just a series of small compromises until one day you're standing in a hallway, saying something you never would have imagined saying 3 years ago, and somewhere underneath it all, some part of you knows it. So let's get into that scene. Because the writing, the performances, the way it's staged, everything is doing something specific, and it's worth slowing down on. Robbie doesn't come in hot. That's the first thing. He doesn't come in angry or accusatory in the way you might expect. He comes in quiet, almost gentle, and that's scarier. Because you realize immediately this isn't an impulsive decision. He's been preparing for this. He's thought it through. He knows exactly what he's going to say, and he says it like someone who has rehearsed it so many times it's worn smooth. He tells her he knows. He lays out what he's seen, and he's not wrong about the clinical picture. The show has been too careful for him to be completely off base. But then he pivots, and instead of saying, "We need to get you help," or "let's figure out the right path forward," he says something that is unmistakably a threat wrapped in the language of concern. He will report her, unless she cooperates. Unless things change. Unless, and he's a little vague here, which is smart writing, she acknowledges that he has seen what he has seen. Al-Hashimi's response is extraordinary. She doesn't flinch. She looks at him for a long, very still moment. And what passes across her face is, it's not fear. It's recognition. The recognition of someone who has survived a lot by knowing exactly what kind of threat she's actually looking at. And then she tells him, very quietly, to go ahead. And that's the gut punch. Because she's calling his bluff. Or maybe, and this is what keeps me up at night thinking about this, she isn't calling his bluff at all. Maybe she's exhausted. Maybe some part of her is almost relieved that someone finally knows, even under these horrible circumstances. Maybe the weight of carrying this secret has become heavier than the consequences of exposure. Or maybe she's smarter than Robbie is, and she knows that what he's just done has put him in a precarious position too. Because reporting her the way he's described, doing it would raise questions about how he came to know what he knows. About whether his methods were appropriate. About whether he is fit to be in that building. The scene ends without resolution, which is the right choice. Because this isn't something that gets resolved in one conversation. I want to spend a minute here, because I think this is the most important thing the show is doing. And it's the kind of question good television trusts its audience to sit with. Is Robbie right that a doctor with a progressive neurological condition affecting her motor skills should be practicing surgery? Yes. Objectively, structurally, from a patient safety standpoint, yes. That's not even really a debate. Is the way he went about it, right? Absolutely not. And the show knows that, and it wants you to feel both things simultaneously. There are real, formal processes for exactly this situation. Medical boards, hospital ethics committees, confidential reporting mechanisms. Robbie didn't go to any of those. He went directly to her, alone, in a hallway, and he used what he knows as leverage. That's not advocacy. That's coercion. Whatever his intentions, what he did was wrong, and the show never lets you forget that. But here's the thing that complicates it further. Those formal systems are also imperfect. They are slow. They are sometimes captured by politics and reputation and the kind of institutional loyalty that protects people who should not be protected. Robbie might know this. He might have gone around the system precisely because he doesn't trust the system to do the right thing, which doesn't justify it, but it does make it human. Al-Hashimi, on the other side of this, is also not purely a victim. She has been practicing with a condition she knows is affecting her. She has been making that decision unilaterally, for herself, without the input of the patients who are trusting her with their lives. That is a profound ethical breach. Her fear is understandable. Her pain is real, and she is still wrong. This is what mature storytelling does. It puts two flawed people on a collision course and refuses to hand either of them a halo. All right, let's get into the theories. Because this ending doesn't just close out Season 2, it launches about 5 different storylines that Season 3 is going to have to navigate. First, Al-Hashimi's diagnosis becomes public. I think this is inevitable, and I think the show will explore what that actually looks like from both a personal and professional standpoint. There's a version of this story where she gets ahead of it, where she chooses to step forward on her own terms before Robbie can force the issue. That would be a fascinating arc, because it would allow her to reclaim some agency in a situation where she's felt powerless. A voluntary disclosure is a completely different story than a forced one, and Al-Hashimi is someone who has always needed to control the terms of her own narrative. Second, Robbie faces real consequences for what he did. I genuinely believe the writers are not going to let him off the hook here. There's no version of this where he threatened a colleague in a hospital hallway and everyone just moves on. Either Al-Hashimi reports him, which would be both justice and irony, or someone finds out what happened another way. Either way, Robbie's arc in Season 3 is about reckoning. He's going to have to look at who he's become and decide if that's who he wants to be. Third, and this is the theory I'm most invested in, there's a time jump. Not a huge one, maybe 6 months, maybe a year. Enough that the immediate fallout of the finale has already partially played out, and we come back into the story mid-consequence rather than watching every painful step. This would allow the show to skip the procedural beats and land us back in the emotional weight of what these two characters mean to each other now, after everything. Because here's the thing, I don't think Robbie and Al-Hashimi are done. I think that confrontation, as ugly as it was, revealed a level of investment in each other that is actually more intimate than anything openly friendly they've shared. He cares enough to risk everything to say something. She was shaken enough to let one moment of genuine vulnerability show before she closed back up. These are not two people who are going to be able to simply avoid each other. The most interesting version of Season 3 puts them in a situation where they have to work together, where the thing they were fighting about, patient safety, competence, honesty, forces them back into the same room. And they have to figure out what they are to each other now. The last thing I want to say, and then I'll let you go, is this. The Pitt is doing something that most medical dramas don't bother to do. It's asking hard questions about the people who take care of us, about what it costs to be that person, about the impossible standards we hold doctors to, and how those standards sometimes stop doctors from being honest about being human. Al-Hashimi's secret isn't just a plot twist. It's a question. If you were a doctor and your body started failing, what would you do? How long would you keep going? What would it take for you to admit that the thing you've built your life around is slipping away? And who in your life would you trust with that truth? And Robbie's threat isn't just a dramatic turning point. It's another question. When you believe someone is doing something dangerous, someone you respect, maybe someone you care about, what is the right thing to do? And how much of the right thing is actually just what you want? How much of moral certainty is really just self-interest wearing a costume? These are not easy questions. They don't have clean answers. And the fact that this show is spending its Season 2 finale in that discomfort, rather than resolving everything neatly, rather than giving us a villain and a hero, that's the mark of something genuinely worth watching. I don't know exactly what Season 3 is going to look like. Nobody does. But I know this, whatever happens next has to live up to the weight of that hallway. That moment. That scene where two people told each other the truth in the worst possible way. And if the writers handle it with the same care they've brought to everything that came before it, I think we're going to be talking about this show for a very long time. That's everything I've got for today. If this hit you the way it hit me, drop it in the comments. I want to know which moment from the finale has been living rent-free in your head. And if you've got a Season 3 theory I didn't cover, put it down there. I read everything. Like if you're deep in the Pitt discourse with me. Subscribe if you want to stay in it. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care.